Okay. Okay. Well, let's see. Okay. Good morning, Professor
Good
Tootle.
morning.
So I've tricked you. You've promised not to do these podcasts and video conversations, and then we put them on Spotify and Facebook and YouTube. As long as you didn't have to prepare for these discussions. And so I've tricked you. I'm going to talk about 2024, but more in a planning session kind of way, because I'm trying to think about what American citizens should be thinking about at the end of 2023, and what's 2024 going to bring us. And so I've tricked you. In a way, it's a planning session by asking it in that way, because I
Okay.
want to know what you're thinking about. I don't know if you saw the title of this, but I renamed you probably for the first time. Has anyone or else put you in a description as futurist, Dr. Stephen Tootle, instead of
Yeah, I
historian?
reject that.
Right. Well, and that's one of my topics. So anyway, I've given you a new title. You can choose to reject the title, but I've given you a title as futurist.
Okay.
And let's start with that.
All
What
right.
the hell is the value of history if unless you're predicting the future? I mean, unless you're giving us some insights on how to act in the future or what to expect, what the hell value is a historian?
Well, I think that in terms of planning, the distinction I always make is that if if everything is going to just keep going the way it's currently going, then um, you kind of need a social scientist. So social sciences are good at predicting when things are going to stay the same. That I mean, if you want to be the world's greatest social scientist, wake up every morning and predict that the same thing is going to happen today that happened yesterday, and you will have by far the best batting average of any social scientist alive today. So, and often when I'm describing what history is, I'll say history is all the times when poli sci was wrong. Um, because there are these times, because we're human beings, that we zig instead of zag, or zag instead of zig, or we zigzag instead of going in a straight line. And so what history really does is it helps us to see maybe some of the deeper patterns that lead to things that are, if not probable, but possible based on history. So what I can often predict is, the easy thing to do is to predict that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to be the nominees of their parties. They're both going to live, and and that Joe Biden is going to become the next president of the United States. In other words, if you're playing the odds, that's what you would predict. But I think what history does is it says, well, what if that doesn't happen? you know, what if something happens? What are some of the possible scenarios that could play out that maybe you haven't thought about? And also, I would say the other, I mean, there are many values to history, but it's also good to point out every now and then that character is destiny. That one of the that yes, if we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next year, we should plan on it being pretty much like last year. But among these individuals, um, know that the unpredictability of human character is going to play some role in creating a future we could have never imagined. I mean, I was just talking about this with my kids last night. Because I stumbled across this document from Dwight Eisenhower from mid 1940s, 46, 47, and he was talking to a bunch of black kids at a YMCA in New York, and he was saying, "Oh, by the year 2000, nobody's going to be calling you Negro Americans. We're just going to be calling you Americans." But and he said, by the time you're my age, it's going to be around the year 2000, and of course, we aren't going to have race issues in America. And I was telling my kids, if even remembering the 1990s, I'd say in many cases things have gotten worse, not better. And the other thing history can remind you of is that things don't always get better. it's not a always just an upward trajectory. It takes human beings making decisions, and ideas matter. And what people know, what they value, how they order their values, that's going to profoundly affect the future in ways that are unpredictable.
So there's so much to grab onto already. I'm going to kind of keep with what was in my thought process, but feel free to interrupt back to what you want to talk about, because I'm hoping that you're going to surprise me with a couple things that, hey, John, we need to spend much more time talking about blank, blank, and blank. I'm still confused, though. When we see facts, Americans, or maybe even you and I occasionally, see facts that occurred and we have the exact opposite conclusion of what we just saw, based off our worldview. So I have a couple major topics that I don't know if we've discussed enough that do play into current contemporary politics, but just not in the right way. So let me give you one fact, and since Jake's on, he can correct me. You don't know what the interest on the debt was in the fiscal year ending in September of 2023 for America, because
No,
you didn't look it up. I looked it up.
Jake, if what he can look up right now is the Manhattan Institute puts out its yearly chart book.
Yeah.
On the debt.
So he can look it up. But let me tell you what it is, because I looked it up, at least by the Google machine. We are paying interest on the debt, $659 billion. That's what we paid last year. By the way, that's double of what we paid in 2020. And since I'm a simple guy, I try to figure out, well, how much should I pay, and how much do each of our two children, and how much should my wife Meredith pay? Every single man, woman, and child in America paid $2,000 if we were to divide it that way. I know there's royalty debt, and there's corporate income tax. There's all sorts of ways that we get money into the federal government. But if we were just paying it by individual, the 330 million Americans, that would be $2,000 a piece of what we paid just to pay the interest on the debt. I don't know if we've talked enough about that, Professor, and I don't know if Republicans are being good ambassadors about that. I mean, they say, hey, we need to cut services if we're going to spend money to Israel or Ukraine, and we need to get cut down. We need to pay for it somehow. But I don't know if people are articulating how serious this could be for America. Now, am I wrong? Do you think I'm a paranoid freak?
No.
And if I'm not, then why isn't everybody talking about it?
Because nobody knows where the tipping point is. Because previously we thought that the tipping point would be when our debt load would hit over or would hit 100% of GDP. And we're far beyond that now.
Way beyond it.
Yeah, I think we're
way beyond.
I mean, we went to 109, and I think we might be in the 120s. You can look up the debt clock right now to see where it stands. And our economy still didn't collapse in ways, because we're finding ways to finding new ways of servicing our debt, but eventually there comes a limit to that, and then trying to think through what the implications might be. So for instance, the Fed now buys a lot of US debt. Actually, this is a great way of thinking about this as your first question as a historian. So you think about, okay, what does this mean that we have this massive debt? Eventually, it will lead to the collapse of our financial system, because it's continuing to grow. And it's unsustainable. What would have to happen in order for the United States financial system to completely collapse? In many ways, we're supported by the fact that the rest of the world still perceives us to be the most stable form of currency. What might happen is, if there was another country who had a currency that was perceived as being more stable, that they could peg it to something else. And you can imagine a world where, say, the euro and Bitcoin become.
You're not saying yen, though. You chose euro and Bitcoin.
Well, what might happen is that, you can imagine if um, the Chinese would take over the East Asia economy. Not sure if India would want to go along with that. So they would have to both peg their currencies. I mean, because every country does business with every other country, so you still have to have some way of trading and doing business. But if the dollar became unreliable or worthless, then countries might switch overnight to using something like the euro or Bitcoin as a more predictable currency. And at that point, all of our bills come due because everybody wants to be paid and no one wants to be paid in worthless money. And nobody knows if this is going to happen next year, in 2 years, in 5 years, or in 10 years. But all we know is we have to pay this. We cannot keep spending the way we are spending. We have and it's not a tax problem we have a spending problem we have. That's why I wanted Jake to link to that Manhattan Institute chart book, because one of the things that they do on that chart book every year is they run through almost all of the common solutions that people have to solving our debt problem through things like spending cuts or foreign aid or raising taxes. And what Americans need to understand is that you could do all of those things and it wouldn't be enough if you didn't cut spending. There is only one path, and it is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security.
Okay, so Professor, on that topic, because I have 4 other topics, but let me just interject. On that topic, Democrats in particular, but with the consent of Republicans, because they don't want to deal with a bunch of older folks, because the whole voting older folks, we're all getting older and demanding more in healthcare and don't touch retirement. All the pressure is on the opposite, not to pay off the debt or even be concerned about it. So Republicans are almost as guilty as Democrats on that.
But don't forget Medicaid, though. That's the other thing is like everybody wants to blame old people, but it's also just the expansion of many programs through Medicaid as well.
Agreed. And Medicaid's a nuance of that, but still, there's not a lot of people saying, "Hey, take away money from injured people or people that have some illness or condition." That's not the pressure. There's not a whole protest group out there saying, "Take that away from people," is there? I mean, the pressure is to give people more.
Right.
So who's talking about this in a rational way? I mean, you and I are being semi-rational, but have we heard that in the presidential debates? Do we hear that in citizens' initiatives on the ballot? I mean, why are we going through life blind as a society?
Because until the collapse happens, no politician has an incentive to solve this problem. Because let's say we have, I mean, this kind of thing happens all the time, actually, in a smaller way. Let me give you a small example of this. Like, we had a fairly sharp recession during the first Gulf War in 91, 92 with a bailout. And George H.W. Bush was blamed for it. You don't want to, it's like a game of, musical chairs. If you're the politician who solves the problem and addresses it, you get blamed for it when it actually, so the only way as a politician, I mean, that's why I like George H.W. Bush is he was the kind of politician who said, well, what's best for America? I'm going to identify this problem and try to solve it now, rather than leave it.
Professor, just so I can remind myself, he's the president said, read my lips, no new taxes.
Yeah.
And then he raised taxes and I voted against him just to prove your point. He promised us.
There you go. Yeah. So
and he broke the promise and I voted against him the second time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because he solved the problem. He
Yeah.
addressed the problem. And
And so I'm the
who
problem for, you're saying I'm the problem.
you were in
Americans
1992.
that,
Yeah, but I mean, that's why
yeah.
we need to be pretty humble when we can try to condemn other people, because you realize, like, I probably did this stuff too. But now just imagine if we did somehow manage to elect um, Mitch Daniels, probably the guy who's best qualified to be president. If by some miracle Mitch Daniels became president, and he said we need to deal with this problem. Well, dealing with that problem is going to mean recognizing that some large percentage of our economy right now is fake, and paying off debt is going to involve cutting programs that are politically popular and probably creating a recession.
Yeah. Okay.
And nobody wants to
Okay.
do that. So
No one will do that. Okay, you're being overly persuasive on this, and I'll have to ponder that. Let me ask, though, are you the subject matter expert to help guide us through this? Or do we need to bring in an economist? Do we need to bring in another historian? How can we kind of shake people awake until the crisis, or do we just, you're saying we have to wait till the crisis happens? Well, we're two fairly smart people that care about our society and want to help. That's why we're doing these podcasts. So we just go, yeah, you're right, Professor. We got to wait till the thing damn collapses, or should we bring in a speaker that can help people think through this?
well, you could bring in the guy who puts together that chart book every year, because he's somebody who stays focused on this year round. But in terms of the solution, I think in many ways John McCain had the correct solution, and everybody ridiculed him for it, which was,
Yeah.
and President Obama said, you want to take a hatchet to the budget, and what we need is a scalpel. And
Right.
no, we actually don't need a scalpel. We need a hatchet, because the problem with our again, I'm saying the most politically acceptable way to do this is to first stop spending more, then hold the line on spending, and then spend less, and do that with across the board cuts, because
But
every time,
Republicans wouldn't have either house of Congress, though, if they did that.
right, nobody
They
would,
kind of
no
flirt with
politician
it.
would
They
get
try
elected on
to.
this platform, right? Everybody
Okay.
who would advocate this, I mean, John McCain lost, and
Right.
we would lose if we ran for office with this platform.
So we're living in this fake world on that. Okay, I need to switch topics. Think through that with me, and see whether we should talk about that more in 2024, or whether we just keep our head in the sand like everybody else is.
Well, I don't
Uh,
think my head's in the sand. I'm telling you, this is it's going to lead to the collapse of our economy, and it's going to happen sooner or later. And politicians aren't going to address it until after the collapse. Like,
yeah,
I
but
feel
there's
like
got
I'm
to be a better
delivering
way.
some bad
I get your
news.
premise. I get your premise, but we've got to think through this better as a society.
Yeah,
There's got to be a way to be more mature as a
yeah.
species, than letting tell. And the reason for it is selfish, I guess. Uh, we're taking away decisions from our children and our children's children and our children's children. We're making decisions on how they're going to live their lives now. We're not giving them flexibility
What
to solve whatever the new problems are in the future. We're taking away their decisions. I think that's
you would have,
immoral.
but what you need to have is a sustained, almost multi-generational commitment to a new set of values.
Okay, let's talk about that in the future. For that, now let me make an easy one for you. All the movement, pressure, desire in the world is to take care of the planet in a better way, or stop mining, or stop using fossil fuels. Let's use electricity. Let's use the power of the sun and the earth and waves, or let's do renewable. The pressure is still to this day to stop using fossil fuels, particularly, and other mining in general. I predict that we're going to mine more in 2024, and we're going to mine more in 2025 over 2024, and more in 2026. But we do it in different places in different ways. create electricity rather than just use fossil fuels directly. I don't know if we've talked enough about this. So the history of mining, so to speak, using Mother Earth to create wealth or improve our standard of living and quality of life. Agree or disagree? Is this a topic, or no, we don't need to talk about mining, John?
Yeah,
We don't
I
need
mean,
it.
I'm always down to talk about energy, because until the environmental movement embraces nuclear energy, essentially the
Nuclear.
environmental movement is almost like in cahoots with the coal miners of West Virginia, because their incentive is to never solve this problem. As long as there are coal miners in Virginia, the environmental movement can, pat themselves on the back and pretend to be heroes and say that they're against, but there really is only one solution, and that would be nuclear power. So the one
Some
thing,
fusion, probably.
if the Sierra, no, I just mean regular old fashioned nuclear power.
You
Um,
mean fission? It's just
yeah,
old school stuff, not even a new technology, not
yep.
brilliant, not small nuclear things. You mean old school nuclear?
No,
Hmm.
I'll say it in a controversial way. The thing that created climate change was the environmental movement, like rejecting nuclear power. Because
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
if the whole world had embraced nuclear power in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, then we would have moved away from fossil fuels. We would
But
have,
France and Germany sure did, and then they just flipped on themselves.
right, which is a huge mistake. And Germany is forced to buy energy, dirty energy, from corrupt regimes now, because it's too cloudy. You can't you do not have enough sources of renewable energy in Germany. And they don't exist in the world. It is the only solution. Like, I don't know.
So, so do you agree with this that we probably haven't spent enough time talking about mining? And when I talk mining, I mean drilling as well for oil. Is that something that is an important topic for our species?
Yes,
Energy
energy.
policy.
Well, I would say just like,
Well,
yeah,
yeah. So we
energy.
haven't done enough of that. So do we bring in a historian? Do we bring in a geologist? Do we bring in, if we're trying to help move our society forward, how do you and I and our friends, and we have a bunch of them now, how do we have a better dialogue? I mean, has this been in the debate? Did we take this 5 minutes that we just spent and see that in the last presidential debate? Did we
Well,
have the,
if this is my wish list, I'd say let's get Daniel Yergin on the horn and let him come on and tell us about the worldwide situation with fossil fuels and energy. He's the one who wrote the best book on the subject, called The Prize, which is almost essential. It was actually
prize?
maybe 10 or
Okay,
15
well, let's
years
consider
ago.
that. He's probably too famous for us, or,
Yeah, probably. But I'm sure we could find somebody at AEI, or
okay.
some who would be willing to come on and
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
nuclear
Okay.
power.
Well, okay. So that's two. I'm 2 for 2 so far. Um, Party splits. We have talked about this a little bit, but partially because of the Israel Gaza terrorism slash war. Um, it looks to me like the Democratic Party is right for a split, just like the Republicans been because of not because of Trump, but because of Trump-esque policies. The Republican Party is a mess. I predict that the Democratic Party has been in a mess and kind of split between crazy liberals over environmental policy, but now over war. I think the time is ripe for a whole renew alignment of our political parties. So going back to the 18 whatevers when Lincoln came in. Agree or disagree? I know we've talked about this some. Maybe I'm going to lose on this one. Is this a topic? The parties don't make any sense to me. To have last night, to have the governor of Florida debate the governor of California over presidential politics, and neither of them are running, and both of them are running. I mean, it's a weird world we're in right now. Agree or disagree? What's the future of what's a historian and a futurist? I know you reject the futurist. Say about the political parties in the United States.
I mean, it's the same thing. Like, we're experiencing a crisis, and it will continue until it collapses. And I think even a couple of years ago, I gave this metaphor from Ben Sass, who then was a senator and now is running a college in Florida, where he said the two parties are like two old punch drunk boxers who should have retired a long time ago, and they're just leaning on each other, and the first one to fall over is going to cause the other one to fall over. The only thing propping one of them up is the other one. And I
Fascinating.
mean,
I don't remember that sword from Senator Sass. Interesting. That
but
quote from
I've
Senator
said
Sass.
that in the regulatory state, because because essentially the collusion between Republicans and Democrats to make it hard to get ballot access for president,
Right.
is the other thing that keeps us into this Republican Democrat system. But but at the same token, I could see Dwayne the Rock Johnson or Mark Cuban just sold the Mavericks, and some people are speculating that he sold the Mavericks so that he could run for president. Uh, the no labels people say that they have the structure in place that once they have a nominee, they can get on the ballot in enough states to win. So who knows? It doesn't happen until it does.
So this isn't, so you're using your history degrees. Yeah, John, this is a legitimate topic. It could conceivably happen in 2024 where one or both parties fall apart. You're using your crystal ball and saying, sure, it could happen. Probably won't, but it sure could happen.
It could absolutely happen next year.
Okay, interesting. Well, we will talk about that more because
I mean, essentially, the only thing that has to happen is that the individual voter has to believe that someone who is not a Democrat and not a Republican could win. So all that has to happen really is if you get a poll that says that Mark Cuban versus if they were all three on the ballot, Mark Cuban, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, who would you vote for? And and the first time that there's a poll that says that Mark Cuban gets 45% of that vote, then all of a sudden people say, well, now he could win. And
I thought there already was that poll, Professor. I thought they've done that poll that then unnamed person can be both Biden and.
Nobody wants to throw their vote away. So they have to believe that this is a real alternative.
Didn't they do that in 2016? Trump isn't a Republican or a Democrat.
But I'm saying it has
won.
to be coupled with real ballot access. In other words, you have to have somebody on the ballot in all 50 states, and you've got these three candidates, and people honestly believe, this is a real choice. Then it'll be like an avalanche, a waterfall.
I think I'm following you, but do you get my point about? Do you get my point about Trump? That he wasn't a Republican or a Democrat. He just happened to decide on the Republican Party and people went with him. But he could have done the same thing as a Democrat. He could have done the same thing as a Democrat.
Yeah. I mean, he's even said that if he doesn't get the nomination, he's still going to run. I mean, essentially, that's part of the equation that many Republicans are factoring in. They're saying, we'll definitely lose if we don't nominate Trump, because if Trump is not the Republican nominee, he's going to run as a third-party candidate and draw enough votes away from the Republican Party that Joe Biden is going to win. I mean, that's what Republican voters tell me. They say that's part of the calculus.
God, what a weird world we're in. I've got one more. I was going to do two, but I've got one more for sure. And then let's open it up to see if Kevin or Bart. Bart's not with us today, but Jake is going to be with us for another 20 minutes or so. Technology and AI. We've talked about this a little bit, but to me, it just seems like the news stories keep coming out and coming out. And why would you pay an artist, I don't know, $10,000 or $100,000 for a piece of modern art? We can ask AI to do it, and they'll produce, and they'll produce 50 or 1,000 or 10,000 versions of modern art, and however you wish to describe that, and it costs zero. And you go to the printer and print out a beautiful piece of modern art in your home, and it costs $0 versus 10,000 or 100,000 or $1 million. It sure seems like if you're a mid-range artist trying to do landscapes for people's homes or offices, that gosh, all of a sudden you're in a tough situation with AI. or writing or HR. When you can say, just write me a job description, AI, and then all the people that want that job say, AI, write me the job description to get that job. So like humans aren't doing it on either side of the equation. Then you have this new person in the office because you both use AI. To me, it seems like this is going to be a crazy world and we don't even know it. I mean, like, and I've mentioned this before, Jake can prove me wrong, but it's something like 40% of women and 60% of men would rather date a robot or, than a human. I mean, this is becoming really weird stuff, Professor, and it's only going to exacerbate more. Agree or disagree? Or no, John, this happened when the printing press came
No,
out, and this happened when
I agree, but it's because it's part of a larger trend that we sometimes call credentialism. And I guess we mentioned it a little bit when we talked about the environmental movement, which is, are you someone who wants to appear to solve the problem, or are you someone who wants to actually solve the problem? And it turns out that in much of the world, people don't actually want to solve the problem. They would like to preserve their own privileges and appear to solve problems. And they just want things to go away. And one of the things that AI can do for us is it can take those, it is the mirror image of the credentialism of current structures. So I have to write a letter of, in fact, I'll give you an example from my own life last week. I wrote two letters, or I wrote two evaluations and 3 letters of recommendation. When it was something that was required by a bureaucracy, I just went to ChatGPT and said, write this ridiculous thing that is required from my overlords.
Oh, you did not. You just used that just to file in a bureaucratic thing?
Yeah. I said,
and is it only because of tenure that you're able to say this to the world?
No, it's
right now?
because I know that the other person doesn't actually care.
They don't care.
No, they
you don't care. They
like,
don't care.
I have this blank space where a check mark needs to be, so that if anybody ever checks, I have a check mark there. And so they're not actually interested in, making this person better at their job. They just want their bureaucratic problem to go away, or they want the ammunition to blame someone else and say, I don't know, I did my job. I required them to put words into this box, and they put words into this box, and I checked the box. In other words,
you're arguing against my position. You're saying
no,
AI is really worthwhile to get rid of all that bureaucratic crap because we can all just pretend to have the game instead of taking the hour or two to write some BS letter. You can now just spend seconds to do it, and then you file it, and then you can move on with the real world.
I'm saying it's the symptom, not the disease. The disease is credentialism, because what should actually happen is we should have people who actually care if professors actually are interested in actually getting better at their jobs and improving. And you want to know how that really happens? It happens because I go in and I actually watch this guy's class and I tell him, listen, this is where you can improve. Do this, do that. Now, I'm not going to put that in your evaluation because somebody who doesn't like you can use that against you someday. So I'm going to put a fake letter in your file, and I'm going to tell you the real ways that you can become a better professor, because you're a good person, you're a good professor, you want to get better at your job. So you have the real world over here, which is where we live, and then you've got this fake world that is required by a bunch of nameless, faceless bureaucrats. None of them actually care about classroom instruction. So as the old saying goes, give the baby his bottle. Right? But I have these students who I deeply care about, and I want them to succeed in life, and I want the graduate schools where they're applying to know how special they are, and I spend hours writing those letters. Because I want the person who reads this to know this person has quality. I mean, of course they can do the work. This person has the character that you should want. UCLA, you should be begging them to be your student because they have the requisite character that they will always be a credit. You will one day want to be associated with them, you know,
Yeah.
and so if I'm doing, I just, what I think people need to do, and this is what I tell my kids to do, is like, just make sure that you live in the real world. You know, live in the real world. Like this, stay out of the fake world as much as possible, and live in the real world. And I sometimes use the example
Because
of
you think there will be demand for the real world. You really do think there will be demand for the people just taking a walk in the woods
well,
together.
is not, if people really want to be happy. You know, I feel like Arthur Brooks has just been banging his spoon on his high chair for 2 decades about this, but there is no way of that fake things will ever make you happy. It can't. So the question that you should be asking yourself is, do you really want to be happy? And if the
Okay.
answer is
That
yes,
was, by the way, one of my other topics that we don't. So it's interesting that we got it through AI, but anger versus love, happiness versus sadness, a major topic that I think is still on the horizon. The other last one, and I'm going to open it up to discussion now amongst others, is personal versus civic, or rugged individualism versus socialism. It seems like we have this battle underlying almost everything we talk about, good or bad, based off kind of core beliefs of how you should interact in the world. And I think that's worthy of continuing to talk about in 2024 in an authentic way. But a quick reaction to that kind of
yeah,
stuff is that.
read the Eisenhower's farewell address, and not the famous part about the um, military industrial complex. Read the part where he says, you know, this idea that somehow the civic and the personal are opposites of one another is a false choice, when what we really want to seek is balance. You know, everybody is leading this sort of balanced life, and we should be going through this all the time. You know, I'm asked to serve on a board. I say yes, I say no. Well, my kids are at the age where, you know, they're 12 and 14. They're only going to be at home for a few more years. They're both really involved in sports and school and all this stuff. So I kind of want to be present for them. So for the next, let's say, 6 to 7 years of my life, I'm going to be saying no to some of these civic, some of the civic duty type stuff. But once they're out of the house, I'll go back to my old rule, which was that I look at my calendar, and if somebody asks me, I mean, this is how I end up getting so involved in stuff, is like, people would ask me to do something, and if it fit in my calendar, I said yes, because, and if it didn't, I said no, and that's how you end up, getting involved in a lot of things. But right now, I'm saying no to a lot of things, but eventually I'll say yes. But it's a false choice to say that we have to choose being either selfish or devoted to our communities. Life is long, and we have different stages of life, and also we have different needs, different emotional, we have different skills and different skill sets. And some people, I think about, I know some people who are just painfully shy, who still want to be involved in the community, and the ways that they make the world a better place are just as valid and necessary, because it takes everybody has to be, I shouldn't say has to be, but in my ideal formulation, I guess it always comes back to, like, what am I willing to tell my own kids? There are going to be times in life when you need help, and when you need help, ask for it. I mean, that's an important skill. Be humble enough to ask for help when you need it. But when you don't need help, it's your responsibility to not just not do harm, but you have to put yourself in a position to help others. And that means living a life of service while you go along in life. in whatever capacity that. So I want my kids' values to be oriented in such a way so that they do think about duties. And Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, says, and Martin Luther King both acknowledged that in essence we have these debts that we can never repay. And if you think, oh, I need to, how good of a life, or the final scene in Saving Private Ryan where he says, tell me I've been a good man. In other words, if you actually spent your life thinking about how could I repay the debt that I owe to everyone who made my life possible, it's actually impossible to do that. You can't. But at least it needs to be on the menu. It needs to be on the list. It has. You have to think about like, I need to think about my civic duties, and it needs to be in the mix. And it needs to be in the mix at every stage of your life. And it doesn't mean you run for Congress when you're 23, and it doesn't mean that you have to say yes to being on the library board for 20 years. It means that constantly balance what you need, what you can do, what your family needs, what your friends need, what your job needs. But all these things require balance.
Lovely. Lovely. I know Jake has to leave here shortly. Maybe he's got 5 or 10 minutes, but I want to give you the privilege of asking Professor Tootle a question or a comment based off today's conversation, Jake. You're a great researcher, but you often mute your own opinion on what we should be talking about in 2024. So Jake, jump in, please.
We can't
be able to talk, Jake.
I can't hear him. Can you hear him?
No, I bet he's trying to talk though. I see you, Jake, but we can't. Neither one of us can hear you. Now you were off. Now you should be on. Huh? So, try your plug on your
in the chat, and we'll read it out loud if you have a question.
I sure like hearing his voice though. There you go.
Wait, we got it?
Yeah, we got it now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry, embarrassing, whatever. So I'm glad that we kind of touched on the debt topic, because I'm going to be discussing that with my government class this afternoon, because we're talking about domestic policy. And in preparation to talk about the debt and deficit, I did watch a couple of videos from Brian Rydell, and then I re-listened to one of his interviews with Jonah Goldberg on the Dispatch. So my question is, because I know that we had mentioned the other week that, Argentina elected this new guy to be president, and he says that he wants to do all of these radical reforms, and he wants to dollarize the country because Argentina is going through like rapid inflation. Tootle, you said that we're going to wait to handle the debt until we're at the breaking point and we're going to fall off the cliff. Okay, Brian Rydell has pointed this out, that if we don't get the debt under control, soon, it will hit $100 trillion. And some of the videos I was watching last night, when I was in high school, when Obama was president, the national debt was $16 trillion, and it has doubled, more than doubled over the last 11 years. Okay, so at that rate, within 20 years, if we keep spending this much, we're going to hit $100 trillion. If we hit the breaking, at what point is it going to be too late to do anything?
Well, I mean, when service on the debt and our bills is larger than the entire economy of the United States. I mean, obviously, because at that point, the only solution we would have would be to make our own money worthless. And that's not a great solution.
Well, and I mean, you kind of mentioned McCain bringing up the hatchet argument. And I mean, to be fair, if he had been elected president, well, if McCain had been elected, if Romney had been elected and had been able to enact their fiscal policies, and assuming that COVID didn't affect the US the way it did, like maybe we'd be in a better financial situation. But you talk about like Republicans saying they want to do these reforms and they don't get elected. Well, I mean, do the Democrats have an answer to it? Because the way that I keep seeing it when Democrats are in office, they just spend money and they don't really care about the debt or the deficit going up. Like Biden took credit for the deficit going down, but I mean, you've talked about this. It's just because all of the COVID spending expired. And so that's why the deficit went down. And since he's put in other policies, it's gone back up and no one seems to care.
Yeah, I think the president who came closest and like the model for how it could actually work would be if we were to elect someone like George W. Bush again and not have a war. And if because he's the last president who really had a plan to get the debt and deficit back on track in a serious way. And his plans all failed. He did propose them, and they were rejected by Congress. But if we get to the point where, I guess it would be like, if it would almost have to be, we would have to elect a good person who actually cared about it, who had a plan to deal with it. And then we would have to have some sort of financial shock that hurt everybody. That then maybe politicians could be drawn to a long-term solution. Because essentially we could have handled this problem if back in the year 2000. I mean, it's easy to, or 2001, and it's easy to be nostalgic for a time when these problems were large, but we could have done it by simply holding the line on spending and letting economic growth grow our way out of the problem. But it's actually gone too far now.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if you look at the debates between Bush and Gore in 2000, like the national debt when Bush took office was only $3 trillion. I mean, back then it was probably a lot because that was the most it had ever been. But today that's kind of laughable because, I mean, I'm pretty sure that we add that amount to the national debt like every 2 years. And
Well,
I mean,
I would say use that chart book in your classes because almost everything that a student will bring up as a solution to the problem is addressed in that chart book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jake, what time do you have to go back to class? In like 2 minutes?
Well, I don't have to go back to class. I can skip my lunch because my class doesn't start until 12:05.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, I got you.
I can stay here longer.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this from a teacher's perspective. Are you depressed about this topic? Or are you optimistic that somehow some brilliant person's going to come? What do you convey as a feeling? And I know we don't like feelings, BS. Of course we like feelings. Seriously, are you an optimist or a pessimist? How do you deal with it?
So the way that I teach everything, and again, I'm supposed to be objective about it, and it's not hard for me to bash on Republicans and Democrats. Whenever I'm teaching political science classes, but the way I teach it, I do teach it through like a lens of history. Whether or not my students like that is just the way that I do it. And when I go through like the recent presidents, if I'm talking about different topics, I'll be like, this is an issue and that guy didn't solve it. And Clinton didn't solve it. And Bush didn't solve it. And Obama didn't solve it. And they kind of start picking up on this trend of we have a lot of problems that have existed forever and no one cares to solve them. And then they just kind of feel like the government doesn't care about them. And there's not really a way that I can be optimistic about it because it's like, well, if you look at the last like 5 presidents, they haven't really done anything. And there is no incentive for them to change it because obviously if the president 5 presidents ago didn't get booted out of office for not doing it, why would the next president get booted out of office for not doing it?
Okay, Professor, thanks for that. You didn't help me though, but thank you. Professor,
Yeah.
the way I deal with this is micro rather than macro. I'm not sure I understand the macro well. So Meredith and I, do we put on a new roof? Do we do the sewer line again? Do we paint the outside pergola so the wood doesn't rot? Or do we defer maintenance on all this kind of stuff? And the answer is there's no right answer. You can over maintain your private house or you can under maintain it. I mean, and you can add value to our children's estate, our estate for our children, or they can pay for it themselves if we're still fortunate not to spend it on end of life stuff. So I understand the micro. I'm not sure anyone wants to spend time on the macro. It seems like we've become too selfish or something. So the way I deal with this, Jake, is by talking about it. Is that the politicians won't change until we, as a cultural, say we got to do something different. And if we don't talk about it, like today and at other times, then of course they're not going to respond to it. If they don't get asked that at the town hall meeting, if they don't pick this up on the interweb somehow, and we've got to consistently talk about what we want, or we're going to get what we're not talking about. What's your reaction to that, Professor?
Well, I think that the consequences of not solving this, or I don't know if of not managing this problem better, are so much more dire than what we would have to do in order to actually manage this problem. Because I sometimes remember things like, we deal with these massive bureaucracies, and here's an example. When the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 hit, one of the things that happened was the budget contracted, and our school was like, we got to save money. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to cancel summer school. And my income was cut overnight by 20%, and I don't know how you would handle a 20% income, but like, it's not fun to look at the next year and say, all right, how am I going to spend 20% less? But if the alternative was to lose my job, I would say, yeah, I'll take the 20% haircut for 1 year so that I don't get fired. If those are my alternatives. And if you think about, like, I don't know, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the three drivers of this, if we were to simply hold the line, cut across the board, and do that for a few years, it would hurt. People would complain. Or how about this? I know this might sound like a strange or radical proposition, but how about we stop making these programs universal? Stop giving money to people who don't need it. Like, turn it into what it really. I mean, the only reason it's universal was because they wanted to make it politically untouchable. Well, congratulations, it's politically untouchable. But
You're talking about means testing.
Yeah. No one wants to do it, but I just keep coming back to the idea that if you take everything that we provide in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, if you were to take all those things combined, take that spending, cut it in half, we could build world-class hospitals in every city in America and have them staffed by the world's greatest doctors, and give away their medical care for free. I don't think anybody's going to come up with that as a solution, but because the scale of these entities, because that scale is so large, I don't think that cuts will be as dramatic in terms of, and I'm not saying that they won't hurt individuals, but the hurt to society compared to United States of America no longer the leader of the world, the United States no longer existing as the biggest and most influential power in the world. I just, maybe this is the Americanist in me, but maybe the rest of the world could pick up the slack now. But it certainly would be bad for America, and I think it would be bad for the world if we didn't start thinking about actually cutting the programs that are bankrupting America.
Yeah, I fear, Professor, that the autocratic inclination among our species, the desire for the trains running on time, is still stronger than the freedom desire. If we go away, I don't know who that counterweight is in the world. I don't see it. I don't see any country or series of regions of countries doing that. So I fear for that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, as Kevin quotes, he always says that every generation is invaded by barbarians. They're called children. You have to actually teach people to value freedom over security, because if you don't teach them, they will just do what human beings always do, which is value security.
Yeah. I don't want to end on a down note, so I'm really worried about going to an actuary who's retiring. Now, Kevin Larson, yeah, thanks for showing up for another conversation. I've got to leave here in a couple minutes, but I want to give you a time to ask a question or a comment. It doesn't have to be on the debt and deficit, although you're like that topic. It can be on anything you like. Ask the professor a question or make a comment.
As I told you last night, John, everybody thinks actuaries love numbers, but I actually like turning the numbers into words and stories. So it's much more interesting to me. Yeah, and the fact that in a month I'm about to retire from this day job, I'm sure I'll find things to do when I'm too bored. I'm already seeking out and plugging myself, as Professor Tootle said. You now that I'm at a phase in my time where I have more, or a life where I have more time, I'm finding ways where I can say yes to more things than I used to. I was thinking earlier on, we were talking about the debt and the collective debt, and then what you look at individually. And I think this keeps talking on, if you don't teach your kids about valuing freedom versus security, but if they don't even understand what financial security is, or how to have their own, as opposed to depend and lean on a collection to provide it, it is really hard to press that. One of the things we did, we were able to do with one of the reasons we chose jobs we did versus maybe our passions was to enable ourselves to have a lifestyle and our kids to get through school without debt, and so they could then pursue their next level of increment, or what their fun and passions were. And John, I loved when you said, okay, if we take the debt and divide it by the 330 million people, what does it end up becoming? Too many people don't understand that, because they read the paper and they say anything with illions, they think they're the same. People can't differentiate millions and billions and trillions, even though each one is 1,000-fold more than the previous prefix. And it becomes monopoly money to them. Once it becomes so abstract, they can't even put a handle around. We become desensitized. We just, oh yeah, it's 30 trillion now. It was 15 trillion now, but these are monopoly dollars. And so we don't really take the alarm. But boy, when you say, hey, each one of us, even little babies, are holding $2,000 or $3,000 of debt themselves.
Just paying the interest on the debt, Kevin.
Yes, I know. Yeah. And that, right.
Yeah.
Right. That is just the interest payment. And that's the thing too. We've gotten people so used to, whether it's student debt that the whole generation is laden with, to then consumer debt that people have acquired because they want it now. And the neighbors got it now, and we race each other, and we want it now, and we'll either defer it till later, or we got away with not paying it back. And the government's showing a great example of how to get away with not paying it back, at least the appearance of it, until the problem just becomes so real, just like it would individually. At some point, you keep doing that, you're eventually going bankrupt. And,
all right, so you did depress me. Question or comment on a more enlightening, on a more optimistic note for the professor, and then we got to declare victory.
I think there's a video from the Obama administration, and again, you can watch it and be nostalgic for when the debt and the deficit were this small. But if you go on YouTube and find this video some kid did, illustrating the problem of big numbers. I think you can find it's like Obama, big numbers, and pennies. He puts a bunch of pennies out on a card table, and politicians take advantage of the fact that people don't know the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion, and they translate any of those things into big number. Right. So it's a really useful video just for illustrating to my students, at least, that even though it's totally out of date because it's from, probably 2011 or something. Did you find it? Yeah, you found it. Okay. Great video to illustrate this point. But when I feel like I'm talking about my kids a lot in this episode, but I'm thinking about the future, so often we'll see somebody who has something, and my sons will say like, wow, that's really nice, and I'll, driving around here, I'm looking out my window, I see a truck that it was probably $80,000 or $90,000 truck. I'm staring out my window at probably a $90,000 truck, and my kids will say, wow, that's a nice truck. And I'll say, yeah, that must be for people who can afford that. That must be a really rich person, because all I know is that I would have to have tens of millions of dollars before I spent $90,000 on a truck. So that person must be way richer than us boys, because all I can tell you is that I would never do that with my money. And I don't know if they're getting the message that I'm trying to send, but don't be swayed by what other people have. I mean, that's kind of what I was getting back to, this thing we were talking about earlier of like live in the real world. And now I'm seeing who's pulling out in the truck, and it's like a 23-year-old. This kid who's getting, he just closed the door. He can't be older than 26 years old. Why? How does a 26-year-old have a $90,000 truck? I tell my students all the time, why is your car nicer than mine? Like you make, well, here minimum wage is going to be $22 an hour, which is just mind-boggling. That fast food workers are soon going to make $22 an hour in California. I mean, I live in a fantasy world compared to the other 49 states. When you're a poor student, your car, if you have a car at all, it should be a piece of junk. And what you should really be doing is living. Anyone in this town should be riding their bike to school. Like be poor. Think about the future. I was bragging.
There's like, and to your point though, not to be miserable, but to be happy.
Yeah, and I was saying, showing off to my class, I said, back when I was dating, I said, there's one thing that that picture I should have been able to hold up that that should have made me the most attractive man on every dating website, and it's this. I don't know if you can see it.
No, it's credit. It's changed. Yep. Or I can't see. Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay.
It's my credit score, which is 850, which is perfect. And that's I don't do any of the things that apparently people do to try to goose their own credit score. I just paid my debts my whole life. So I have no idea how I have achieved that, but apparently I have. But how do you get an 850 credit score? I guess it's by not buying that $90,000 truck when I was 23. Probably. I don't know. Get a motorcycle. Get a bicycle.
Yeah, and you mean there's value in living within your means, both as an individual and as a country, and we should probably get back to that kind of ethic.
The stuff that is really good in life is not even expensive. I mean, the library is amazing still. I don't know how many, like, that there's this building that just gives you books for free. It's amazing.
It's a great equalizer. Hey, Kevin, I need to go, Professor, but Kevin, you are the opposite of a pessimist. You're actually a deep optimism, and I don't want to leave you before with an insult. So I'm going to give you another bite at the apple to say whatever you want to the professor or ask a tiny, quick question.
I just like, to me, happiness is a ratio, reality over expectations. And, it's easier to lower your expectations than raise reality. Now, it doesn't mean you have to, have no expectations, but I think it comes to what the professor just said too. You can live simply and find happiness in inexpensive things and experiences, being around people that you care about, spending time. And again, I'm hitting the stage where I've got 2 granddaughters. I get to spend more time with them. I just marvel at, I'm fascinated. They just like to spin around and dance, and they like to play on the playground, and it doesn't cost anything but a little bit of gas if we go in the car, and if we walk by park or take scooters, it's free. So
yeah,
there's a lot of
lovely,
there's a lot of joy out there that's inexpensive. Yeah.
Lovely. Professor, I give you one last bite at the apple now, kind of the old Saturday Night Live skit, Deep Thoughts by Jack Handley. When you're thinking about 2024, what should we be pondering that we didn't discuss today? Is it a specific issue? Is it a specific ideology? What would you like to leave us with? If anyone picks us up in the future, we should be thinking about what in 2024?
I think that I think the big issue that I want everyone thinking about in the broadest sense is, how do we undo the pervasive credentialism in all of the institutions that we touch? Saying that I don't want, yes, I want the grade that my child gets to be a reflection of what they've learned. But what I care about is the learning, and the grade is just the consequence of the learning. And if I work for an environmental group, how do I actually improve the environment? If I work for a civil rights group, forget about fundraising or pretend, how do I actually make the cause of civil rights better in society? Because we, in this world, if all we care about is what we, the box that we check, or the image that gets uploaded to Instagram, or it just leads to this sort of fake house of cards existence that collapses at the first breeze. Back when I used to run with a rougher crowd, my friends would say, friends help friends move, but real friends help friends move bodies. You can't outsource love either. The government can't love you, and no one is going to love you the way that your friends and family love you. And if you want to try to create some system or some institution that can do that, you're going to fail. And you're going to work yourself into some harm, and you're going to do it in a foolish way. And so I'd say, just stop. Just stop trying to institutionalize love, and instead try to create institutions that make it possible for people to live kind and loving lives. Because you can't actually you can't create it. All you can do is allow for the preconditions so that it can flourish.
Excellent stuff. I hope the interweb will give me a couple more bites to have this be recorded. Professor, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us, Ken. Kevin, Ben, sorry not to get to you today. Jake, thanks for missing your friends for lunch for a few minutes. Have a great day, everyone. Great job, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.